Music and an introduction to tactile graphic scoring. Graphic scoring is an excellent activity for pupils of all ages and abilities. It can be used with students who already have a knowledge of musical notation, and it can also be used for students who aren't yet familiar with musical notation. Graphic scoring can be used with primary age pupils right through to S1 and S2. And the more complex forms of graphic scoring can be used with pupils from S3 upwards. Here we have an example of conventional musical notation. Musical notes range from A up to G and then repeat. So they go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right up from the bottom to the top of the musical instrument. The exact position of the notes on the stave within the 5 lines determines which note will be played. The notes sit on lines or on spaces, and this tells the performer which note needs to be played. Note lengths. In addition to the 5 lines, which we call the stave, telling the performer which note to play, we also have symbols for note lengths. A single circle, which is white, means the note has to be held on for 4 beats. We call this a semibreve. A white circle with a stick and a dot after it is called a dotted minim and lasts for 3 beats. A white circle with a stick is called a minim, and this lasts for 2 beats. A black circle with a stick is called a crotchet, and this lasts for 1 beat. A black circle with a stick and a tail is called a quaver, and this lasts for half a beat. And a black circle with a stick and 2 tails is called a semiquaver, and this lasts for 1/4 of a beat. So this tells the performer exactly how long each note needs to be held for. Allowing the performer to choose a different route. So moving away from traditional forms of musical notation, a prominent feature of expressionist music in the 1950s was the emergence of aleatoric, or so-called chance music. Aleatoric music contains elements of chance in the performance. This means that each time the music is performed, it will sound slightly different. On the screen is an example of relative pitch, which is often found in aleatoric music. Instead of using the conventional 5 lines that we normally use for the stave, and crotchets, minims and semibreves, etc., here the composer will just use a series of lines moving down from high through to medium, moving downwards in pitch, so it's entirely up to the performer how they interpret that series of lines. So there's 9 lines, which we could probably interpret as 9 separate sounds, moving downwards in pitch. Then there are 3 separate notes. The last one has an arrow on top of it, and this could be interpreted as the note moving upwards in pitch. But again, in aleatoric music, it very much depends on how the performer interprets the symbols in the music. This is an example of aleatoric music called Gesti and is written for alto recorder and composed by Luciano Berio in 1970. Instead of using the conventional rhythmic notation and stave notation, Berio uses a series of dots. A black dot on the top of 2 lines to produce a high sound, a black dot between 2 lines to produce a medium register sound, and a black dot beneath 2 lines to produce a low sound. It isn't any more specific than this. It's a high sound, a medium sound, and a low sound, so there are no actual pitches involved. There's no A, B, C, D, E, F or G, it's just high, medium or low. So this will affect how it's performed because the performer might use a different note each time. A black dot is an instrumental sound, while a white dot is a vocal sound, and a white dot with a black centre is an instrumental sound coloured by the vocal tone of the same pitch. This means, as the recorder player is blowing, for example, the note A, they're also humming the note A into the recorder at the same time. Then we can see a white circle with a vertical line and a black circle with a vertical line. These both mean to be played as short as possible. We also have lots of diagonal lines through notes. This says breathy fluttering. Then the last symbol is a T sign and then some diagonal lines, which means throat fluttering, a kind of flutter tonguing, which is where you roll an R sound into the instrument. So here we have an example of the notation for this piece. The top line shows what the mouth is doing on the recorder, and underneath shows what the fingers are doing on the recorder. It doesn't look anything like conventional notation. It's all based on these two lines. But we can see the general direction of the sound, whether it's ascending or descending in pitch. There are still dynamic markings, which tells us if the music is getting louder or quieter. We can hear an example of this playing, and in it you can hear the performer making vocal sounds at the same time as playing the recorder. It's quite an unusual piece. Again, because this piece is aleatoric, it will sound slightly different every time it's played. Here we have an example of a graphic score for Solitude, which is a piece by Hans-Christoph Steiner, composed in 2004. It's very colourful and looks quite like a graph. Hans-Christoph Steiner has a guide which goes with this piece of music, telling you what everything means. This is an electronic piece of music, and each sound is represented with what looks like a different kind of sound wave. Each different sound is represented by a different colour. We can hear a clip of Solitude to accompany this slide. Unlike the more traditional five-lined musical stave, which we saw at the beginning of this presentation, with each line and each space representing a different pitch, a graphic score is a very different way of notating a piece of music. It is a very helpful tool to use with pupils when creating and composing their own music. Graphic scoring can be helpful in group work or in individual composing activities. Creating a tactile graphic musical score. When we create a graphic score, we need to consider the following. How will we identify each individual instrument on the score? How will the dynamics, or volume, be represented? How will we represent continuous versus individual versus repeated sounds? For example, there might be a long roll on the drum, or there might be 5 separate beats on the drum, or there might be repeated beats on the drum right through the piece. Can we find a way of describing the timbre? Timbre is a word we use to describe the musical quality of the sound. For example, is the sound scratchy, sharp, smooth, or gentle? How can this be represented through a tactile symbol? For more detailed graphic scoring, note pitch and length can also be represented. Remember that these elements should be represented using tactile materials so that they can be accessed by students who have a visual impairment. Here we have an example of a tactile graphic score, created and used by some of the pupils at the Royal Blind School. The score is divided into 8 boxes horizontally and 4 boxes vertically. The 4 vertical boxes are for each instrument, and the 8 horizontal boxes that go across the page represent the beat. So 1 box for every crotchet beat. The numbers underneath the boxes are in print and braille. The boxes were drawn with swell paper, so they are raised. This means that the students can feel where one box ends and the next one begins. The first instrument we have is a drum. The pupils have designed 4 drum beats getting progressively louder, followed by another 4 beats getting louder again. So they start off with a small circle for the first beat, a slightly bigger circle for the second beat, a bigger circle for the third beat, and then another large circle for the fourth beat. They glued these circles on top of each other so that they stand out from the paper. The first beat has 1 circle, the second one is raised slightly from the paper, the third one is raised a little more, and the fourth is raised even more again. So we have 8 drum beats in total. The next line represents the wind chimes. The pupils chose to represent the wind chimes with glitter because it sounds like lots of very small sounds all clustered together. They also liked the fact that the wind chimes were sparkly and so was the glitter. So we have a wind chime sound on beat 1, then we have 3 boxes or beats rest, so 3 empty boxes, and then we have a wind chime sound on beat 5, followed by 3 more rests. On the third line, we have feathers moving diagonally down. These represent the rain stick. The pupils wanted the rain stick sound to last 2 beats, so the feathers are diagonally across 2 boxes on the score. We have the first 2 beats as rests, so there's nobody playing the rain stick. Then we have a rain stick for 2 beats. Then another 2 boxes rest, and then another 2 beats on the rain stick. Finally, we have the cabasa. The pupils chose to use sandpaper as the cabasa has a kind of scratchy sound. In beat 1, they wanted 4 cabasa sounds, so they cut the sandpaper into small triangles. Each edge of the triangle representing an up, a down, and then an up and a down for each cabasa sound. There is then a bar's rest, and then we have the same pattern again on bar 3, then on bar 5, and then again on bar 7. When pupils are working with a graphic score, you might need somebody to help keep the beat, or to clap every time we move on to a new box. This helps pupils to keep in time when performing. After playing the graphic score for a few times, they may not need this support. It's helpful when writing a graphic score if you have a key or a set of instructions which describe each sound. So on this score, we would have the series of drum sounds describing that the small circle would be a quiet sound, and then a louder one, followed by a louder one again, and then an even louder sound. This can help other people interpret the graphic score. We could then have the glitter representing the wind chimes, and then in the key you could also have feathers equals 1 sound on the rain stick. The sandpaper describes in slightly more detail how the sound will be played. So for each triangle, it's 2 sounds on the cabasa. It's important to make this clear in a key so that other people can see exactly what's required when performing from the score. So for the drum, we have 4 sounds getting louder. For the next line, we have the wind chimes. For the third line, we have the rain stick playing across 2 boxes. And for the fourth line, each of the sandpaper triangles represents 2 sounds played on the cabasa. You'll be able to hear this played on the next slide. Thank you for watching and listening to this presentation. You can find more useful teaching resources on the Royal Blind Learning Hub website.